I've hit confirmed, so I'm okay with being on video. I've given my consent. What I want to do today is talk about some of the features, broad overview of the preaching features, the things that I actually use when I preach sermon writing within Logos. And then I also want to show you some of the things, the tools that I use, particularly note-taking and even searching, that have made using a large library. I've got like 16,000 books, and how I manage that. And if maybe you're new to preaching and you don't have like a rhythm to what that preparation looks like, you've not gone through training that you like about it, I'm going to show you some of the tools within Logos that can help give you really a strategy for using Logos to write your sermon. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you the Sermon Manager. And I'm just going to type this in here. You can find it here. In fact, let me see if I can pull up. Nope. I normally have a tool that hovers over my mouse, but that cursor is not available right now. But right here on the, if your
sharing
toolbar is over on the left-hand side. Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
That would be very helpful when it. Now we're rocking and rolling. Thank you. All right, so right here on the left-hand side, we've got this toolbar icon. It's these 9 dots. When I click on that, you're going to have a lot of options. Some of these, it may look a little bit differently than mine, but I'm just going to type in here Sermon Manager, and then it's going to automatically show up. So just Sermon Manager. This is where you can house all of your sermons in Logos. And the reason I like to house my sermons in Logos, and a lot of preachers will use like Word, and I used Google Docs for a long time, but the more stuff that you put into Logos, the better it gets. So as you can see, I've got like this column here with these passages. This is the main text for the sermon. When I do a search in the future on those passages, this information comes up. So when it comes to like your notes that you take, sermons, passage list, anything that you add into the software, it gets better because it will remember what you've created. And so, yeah, this is all of the sermons that I've got in Logos. I've got 159. This is where I've stored sermons, small group studies. I'm going to do a series with our small group in the fall, like an Anglican 101. Got a lot of people interested in Anglican history, so I'm putting that information in there. And right up here, you've got all this information of week, date, title, series, passage. All that information comes from over here on the side with this sermon information. So like if I click on God Gives Mercy to the Humble, which is my sermon for this coming Sunday, all this information that I put in here, so the title, the series, you can do a number within the series, the passage or passages, tags, topics, all the stuff. It's going to show up in this information. Now, if your screen looks different, you're saying, hey, I don't have these categories, or they're in a different order than what I've got. You can come over here to these 3 lines right here, click on it, and then you can choose which columns you want to appear within the Sermon Manager. So for instance, I don't need the speaker category, but if I click on it, I don't have it because all of mine are right there. But you can have whatever you want within here, and they are movable. So let's say I want to have my series up front, and I don't need to know this week information. I just want that over there. So I have the date that I'm preaching, the series, the passage, all that stuff. It is right there. On the left-hand side, you're going to be able to filter your sermons based on all of the data that you've put into the actual sermon document. So the Sermon Builder, which we're going to get to in just a moment, work together with the Sermon Manager. Those 2 tools work together. They work in tandem. And to open up a sermon, you just click on the title. So right there, God Gives Mercy to the Humble. becomes a link, and it opens up my sermon for tomorrow. And notice in the Sermon Builder document, all of that sermon info is over here on the right-hand side, just like we have in the Sermon Manager. Now, if you've not used the Sermon Manager before and you're like, I don't have any sermons in there, how do I create a sermon? Logos does some really cool things that let you add sermons by one or by series. And this is so cool. Up here in the right-hand corner, we have add sermons, one blank sermon, no date, add. So if I just want to create a sermon and then have it where I can click into it and start writing, I just click add. And right there, now we have an untitled sermon, and I can click on it and it's going to open up that untitled sermon. But let's say I know that my next series is going to be like 7 weeks. Maybe it's a Sunday school class, maybe it's a sermon series, whatever it is, but I'm like, this is going to be 7 weeks. I can come here and I can say, I want this to be 7 sermons, and I'm going to say, I want to add this on the next empty date. So it's going to add 7 blank sermons, August 11th through 17th, weekly on Sunday. So you could, if this was a Wednesday or whatever, you can change the date. You can customize it kind of like a reading plan. But when I click add, it's going to not only create those 7 sermons, but look at what it does on the left-hand side. It has those dates. So August 11th all the way through September 22nd. It puts those in the correct order. And notice how they're all highlighted. So sermon 1 through 7 highlighted. English Christianity is not part of that sermon series, so it's not highlighted. Logos does that automatically for you. But what you're able to do is in the information panel on the right-hand side, you're able to add data to all those sermons at the same time, and it saves you time. So let's say this series is going to be, oh, is it blocking? My camera is blocking some of what he's trying to demonstrate. Did that fix it? What about now? I'm going to keep going, and so I'm sure someone will put it in the chat. There we go. Okay, so we've got over here on the right-hand side, notice right here, it says 7 sermons. I'm just going to type this series as Christ is King right there. And notice what happens here with the series. Christ is King. All 7 sermons get that same sermon information. And so you're able to, like, if you have a tag that you want to use, or all these sermons are going to be about this topic, you can add that information in there. So we could say this first sermon is, now I've just got that Christ is King series. I'm going to move this over here. Sermon 1, untitled. Let's say I want to title it Christ Exalted. It doesn't matter what it is. But notice when I make this change over here, it automatically changes the title of the sermon right here. So you're able to click on each sermon, put the information here, and it's going to update it for you. So, and then when you're ready to work on that sermon, you just click on that sermon. It's going to open it up, and notice you've got this information, the title right there. You can start your sermon right here, and you can add information within the Sermon Builder document. Anything you put here within the Sermon Builder in the About section is going to show up in the Sermon Manager in the same info section, the About section right over here. And then on the left-hand side, you're able to filter, which is absolutely fantastic. If you don't have the filter menu up, based on if your screen just looks differently and you don't have this filter menu, it's up here in the left-hand corner, these 3 lines. So I can remove the filter menu, or I can add it back in. And this lets you filter sermons instead of trying to scroll through here. So like I've got a lot of sermons in here, and I love to see what I've written before. Tomorrow I'm preaching out of Luke 18, 9 through 14. So last week I came down here to Luke right there. So anytime you add a passage over here, you're going to get the option to filter it out by book of the Bible right there. Now I've got all my sermons from Luke, and then you're able to you can filter these, categorize them just like you would any sort of column in other apps. So we could say, hey, all of the sermons that I preached at Little Rock Church or St. Andrew's Sunday School. I taught a Sunday school class from Luke a while ago last year. And so, yeah, I absolutely love the Sermon Manager because it lets me add my sermons. It lets me search this information later. It's available on mobile, my phone, my iPad. Just absolutely fantastic. So when this came out a couple iterations ago of Logos, I was absolutely blown away instead of using Google Docs to find everything. But there's nothing wrong with using Google Docs. I just think this system is so refined and so good. Another thing that I want to show you is up here in the right-hand side. We have what's called the week grid. I'm going to make sure. Yeah, so now I've got my sermons in date order right there. So all the way from September 22. So it makes it easy to plan out ahead. But right up here, we're able to see the radial calendar. And this is a cool feature within Logos that lets you get a radial view of the year of your preaching or teaching schedule. And so right here, we're able to see August and September. And notice it has in kind of a green color, or not green, orange. And I'm hope I get that right because I'm colorblind. But it's put in this series that we just created called Christ is King. When I hover it, if you look in the middle of the Word document or the middle of the radial ring, it's going to say Christ is King. That is the title of that series. And then right there, we've got Anglican 101, Christ is King. And so because there's actually 2 sermons on that date. Or for that week. And so, yeah, you're able to get a radial view. So let me, up here in the top left-hand corner where you see this year, if you go to, you can actually do this by year. So I'm going to go back to a year that I preached a lot. We'll go to 2020. There you're able to see a much more holistic view of what your radial calendar would look like. So when I was preaching full time, I only preached about 40 weekends a year. We utilized a preaching team that I led, and this let me be able to see my gaps very easily. And so we're getting some questions, and yes, we will answer all those. So there is a way to import a Word document into the Sermon Manager, and we're going to, I've not done that in a long time, but right there within the Sermon Manager, let me go back to the week grid, your setting menu, the 3 dots up here, you've got all these options. There's going to be an import feature, and you can import sermon content. So add sermon body text with the docx file. So the important thing is it's got to be a docx file, so which would be a Word document, but you can choose that file and it's going to upload that information into Logos. So let's say you've got sermons in Google Docs. You can export or save those as Word docx files, upload it to the Sermon Manager, and it's going to show up automatically within the Sermon Manager. You can also do a sermon schedule for those of you who have like created your sermon schedules within Excel. So when it needs a CSV, it's like an Excel format. And there's information. We don't have time this morning to go into all the details of how to do it, but you can click on either of those links, the CSV format details, if you're interested in uploading that CSV file for the sermon schedule, or just sermon content. You can do file format details right there. And yeah, it's a great feature for someone who's not used Logos before, or not used Logos for their sermons, and then they want to import that data because they've got a lot of it. You can do it right here. And then we've got word count is important for my context. Does the Sermon Builder count words like Google Doc does? Thank you, Mark, for that question. And absolutely. So let's move into the Sermon Builder. And this is the Sermon Builder. And the way that I want to, the best way to see the word count is at the bottom left-hand corner. I love this feature because not only does it give you the words, so as you can see, this is 3,492 words. It also tells you if you read that at an average pace, it's around 29 minutes. Your mileage may vary on this because you may speak like me very quickly, and 29 minutes ends up being 23 minutes. Or you may be the kind of person that uses an outline and you do a little bit more extemporaneously preaching. It's really just a gauge. I found it to be pretty accurate for me when I read it, to be right around that mark. I've got to cut down some stuff because at our church, I try to keep around the 25-minute mark. We've got multiple services, and I want to be sensitive to all the other things that are going on that morning. But yeah, that's it does the word count. Now, when we're in the Sermon Builder, it looks kind of like a Word document, but it is not a Word document. It's not a word processor, even though it does some of those functions. And when you get into it, you may have all sorts of highlighting things that you like to use. Logos has some of that, but it's not meant to be used like a Word document. It's really meant to build your sermon, hence why they call it Sermon Builder. And so up here on the, we'll just go through this list up here. We've got these 3 lines. This is where you get your outline, and anything that you add. So like right here, I'll add opening prayer. And then there's the prayer that I've got for tomorrow. When I click on that, when I highlight that, and then come up here to where it says normal, I can add different sort of how I want it to be. Headings, block quotes, illustration, or prompt are the options that you have. So let's say I want this to be a heading 4. Notice that it goes into the opening prayer outline. The opening prayer goes into the outline, and then other headings that I have automatically show up in the outline. The things that won't show up in the outline are the block quote, illustration, or prompt. So right here, when I click on this, this is an illustration. This parable of the Pharisee and tax collector reminded me of the story. So I'm telling an illustration. I've got that as a marker for when I preach that this is an illustration. Notice that it's got that kind of text. That heading is illustration, but it doesn't show up in your outline. And so I do use those features of prompt, illustration, and block quote. And then when you're in the text, you've got these options just like you would a Word document that really help you write it like you want it. So a lot of times when I would use slides, I would often hand a manuscript to the guy who was running the computer, the girl who was running the computer, and I would like highlight here, and I would turn it into like blue, like that. And then I would say, hey, anytime you see blue, that's when we're going to change the slide. That's when the slide needs to be changed. So you do have some highlighting options for those of you who use that sort of feature. And then to the right of that, you've got bold, italics, underline. You can do fill in the blanks. And we're moving pretty quickly, so I'm not going to go over all these things. You should come to the sermon workshop to ask more specific questions. But you've got all these different features that you can use, and Logos allows you to build out the sermon with slides, handouts, questions. So right there, if anybody ever wants sometimes I'll get asked, hey, can you give me a copy of that sermon? Probably to scour it for things that they can accuse me of and falsehoods. But when they want to look at that sermon, this is what I print them out, this text, because it's not going to have all of the stuff that the other options like slides, handout, questions. For the slides, anytime you add a verse or a heading, it's going to create a slide, and it's automatic. And we just don't have enough time. Come to the sermon workshop or email me. I can put my email address in there later, and I can point you to some videos about how to edit the slides. It is great for someone who may not have a lot of experience putting together slides, or someone who doesn't have a multimedia team, which is most churches, and it's just a pastor who's like, hey, I just want to put some slides together, simple slides, passage, maybe some quotes. Logos has you covered, but we don't really have time to go into it this morning. But yeah, just a lot of options. The last thing I want to show you in the Sermon Manager is this preach button. Now, since I'm on my computer, it's going to open up a browser, and you're not going to be able to see it. But when you're in your iPad or tablet, and you're in a sermon builder document like this, which is what I'll do tomorrow on my iPad, I will press that preach button, and it's going to open up a format of this sermon that is specifically to preach from. And within that preach mode is a timer. And so when I get down to the 2-minute mark and the 1-minute mark, which in our church is important because we've got a lot of things going on that day, it gives me like a red flashing bar up at the top of my screen. So I'm always able to see, and it gives me a countdown as I'm going. So I'm always able to see where I'm at on time for pacing. So yeah, I absolutely love the preach mode. It has made preaching so much easier for me in a lot of ways, to become a little bit more polished. And up here you can export and to a document, you can print it, you can do all the things. A couple things that I want to mention before we do move on is popular quotes. And Jason, you may have to come back. Is popular quotes, is that for people who are like beta users or subscribers?
I'm popping back. You mean early access? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes. Is it early access?
Yeah. No, I don't believe it is. I don't believe it's early access. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, there's nothing new there. But I don't believe it is. And some users can jump over to their software now and double check on their end inside of the sermon builder if there's popular quotes feature like what Ryland's showing right now.
And so they're going to roll this out, I think, for more users this fall at different levels. And so if you don't have this, I think you'll be able to get it at a very reasonable price coming up soon. But this popular quotes, you can type in anything like love, and then it's going to pull up quotes about whatever whatever word. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff says, I think the quotes is available to everyone. It's the AI that's early access. But yeah, you've got all these quotes just by typing in a word. So we could say like incarnation right there. And it's going to pull I use this all the time. I didn't use this past week for sermon prep, but I do use this fairly regularly. And then this sermon assistant, this is new. And it's going to allow you to either come up with an outline, illustrations, questions, applications. This is based on AI, and it's been pretty good. I look forward to the way that it is used more. I think there's some room for improvement, but I think it's a good way when a preacher might be stuck. So like on the outline, I'm never going to preach someone else's sermon. But I could come up with that. I've got it set on outline with the sermon passage. Who's my audience? They've all got check marks, but I've got it set on adults. It's in blue. You can say, hey, I want a 3-point sermon, even though I often will try and preach a 1-point sermon. And then it's going to generate an outline. I have found this helpful in topical preaching. So sometimes I preach at a recovery ministry that's not really part of a series, and they're not going through a book of the Bible. So I'll do this. But you get all this, I think, helpful information, not to copy and paste and say, hey, this is my stuff, but to really just begin to generate ideas when you might need a little bit extra nudge. But you get a summary section, ways that you might want to apply it, how to teach it, how to point people to Christ, big idea of the passage. It's like a thesis, and then recommended study, and then some points. So yeah, you can play around with this. I have found this helpful. But again, I feel like the work for me as a preacher is when I'm in the text, and I view it just another resource, like I would a commentary, just something to think about. You certainly don't have to use it. And if you don't like AI, Jason's got that question up there. No reason for you to use it, and you'll be fine without it. All right. So yeah, that's Sermon Manager, Sermon Builder. The next thing I want to show you is how I use notes to prepare for my sermon. So I'm going to pull up my notes tool. And every week I've got a notebook called This Week's Sermon. And I've got a lot of notebooks. I try to keep them organized and simple. Everybody's got a different system. But for me, when I start a sermon, I'm doing a couple things. I'm finding information that's going to be helpful for that sermon, but I am also almost creating like my own study Bible. And I'll show you what that means. So I've got this week's sermon. The first note I moved yesterday because I don't think I needed it anymore. Oh, there it is. So I've got this note that is anchored, and thank you, Jason, for sharing about notes because we don't have time to go through all the features of it. But I've got it anchored to a passage. So this means that this note is anchored to Luke 18, 9 through 14. And it's in this week's sermon notebook, and you see this X with the circle, yellow circle. Anytime I have an X and a yellow circle, I know it's going to be a sermon outline. And I always start with this note. And the reason I love to have it anchored, I don't need my fact book. I need my Bible. There we go. I'm going to go to Luke 18:9. Notice right there, it has that X in the yellow circle. That means that there's a sermon outline there. And I'm able to see it within the Bible. And so as I go along and create these different notes, information that I found, and I've got a color coordination that I use. You can watch note videos online to find a strategy or come up with your own. But for me, it's yellow are my own thoughts. Green is someone else's thoughts. Red generally has to do with like word study. And then these purple bubbles, like here in Luke 18:9, is the illustration that I used. And so I love using the notebook to prepare my sermon because it's going to show up in my Bible so that I have that information in the future, just like I would a study Bible, but it's things that I have found helpful. So when I'm preparing for a sermon, I'm doing double duty of finding information about the text, putting it in a notebook so that it's in my Bible for the future. And then I've got all my sermon outlines within the text. And I've loved this when I've been under someone else's teaching. I was at church a few weeks ago and I had my phone out. I was in Logos and he told me, the preacher said, hey, here's what text we're going to be in. I went to that text. I had a sermon outline and I'm able to go through my stuff, really to help me get into learning more. And so that may not be something you're interested in. And if not, no harm, no foul. But yeah, I've got all these notes that are connected to the sermon, to the Bible. And then when I'm done with these notes, I will take them and then put them in their appropriate notebook. So right here, this one, Luke 18, 1 through 17, is going to be Bible notes. I'll just right there, and then it's gone, and then it's there for the future. It's still going to be in my Bible. Courtney asked, how do you sync your notes with your sermon prep? So what I do, Courtney, is I create this sermon document, this note first. So in fact, let me just go ahead and do that. I'm going to create a new note, and this is a blank note. I'm going to create the icon. So now I know, hey, Isabel.
Hey, Daddy.
Hold on 1 second. Can I be out there in a minute? It's my 5-year-old daughter trying to steal the show. So no, she's I'll be out there in a minute. Okay. So yeah, I start in this week's sermon, I start a note like this. I'm going to anchor it to a text like this. So we could say just Luke 18:9. When I do that, notice now I've got another note right there. And this is where I start to put information into the note. And so if, let's say I've got a resource open, I'm going to open up any resource. Doesn't matter what it is. I'll scroll down here. Let me create a new note. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it. This is in this week's sermon note. So what I'm doing is I am gathering information from different resources and placing them in notes. Most of the time they're anchored because I work through the text. Sometimes they're not. But I just throw everything that I want for that sermon into this week's sermon notebook. And then based on that information, I really do believe it's kind of a work of the Holy Spirit, just working through the text, prayer, just being in it, diving in. Over time, I'll be able to really rightly divide that text, that word. And that's where I begin to take this note. So I'll start typing whatever it is, ideas that I have about it. And out of that work comes an outline. Now, when I've got that information ready, it's going to often look like this. So this is a fully formed sermon outline that I had. So I've got these information. These are just thoughts that I had about the text from my notes, from things that I had observed, just reading the text. And then I came up with here big themes: feeling out of place, humility. We love to compare and contrast, self-righteousness. I generally bold my thesis statement. So the text is here to teach us that God gives mercy to the humble. And then I'll begin throwing like illustrations in there. This is where I do a lot of my sermon writing so that I've got an outline. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to take all of this information. I generally won't take it at the top, but I will copy it. I'm going to go back to my sermon builder. Let me open it up. You can't see it, and that's okay. And so this has, I'm not going to copy and paste here, but I will copy and paste in this document, a sermon builder document, and then I fine tune it. I build it out even further because I preach from manuscript. And then right here, you are able to see all of the different notes that you have. I don't use this a whole lot because you're not able to see everything, but you can add that information with that insert. So, if you've got your cursor here, I can just add that information. It does more than what I want to. And it looks like it added that whole sermon outline. And so I'm going to actually go back and restore that version. But yeah, you can. So there are a couple ways that you can do that. But for me, it all begins with the sermon notebook, having a note specifically for my outline, adding information from other resources into that notebook, and then I will take that outline once that's ready, put it into like a sermon builder document. And that's where I really, the last couple days, flesh it out even further and say, no, that needs to go, or the order of this isn't good. But I've always got that work at the ready. And then when I'm done, like this one, this is a note on Luke 18, 1 through 17, information that I thought of. I'm going to take it and put it into my Bible notes category. It's going to stay anchored to my Bible. It's going to show up in my Bible, but it's not going to be in that notebook, because what I want to do, let me delete these two, because what I do when I preach is, this is an illustration anchored to that text. And notice I've got anchored to another text for the future. Sometimes I'll do that. I'll anchor it to multiple text when I'm thinking about it. I'm going to move this one to illustrations and quotes. So I'm building that. And then I'm going to take all this information, copy and paste those, or copy those, highlight them all. I'm going to put those in my Bible notes. I'm going to put this one in my Bible note. And then this sermon outline, I've got a whole notebook just for sermon outlines and series idea. And so when I go down there, I've got 66 different sermon outlines ready to go. And Jeremy wants to know, please re-show the restore feature. I missed the process. Absolutely. So I've got this sermon here. Logos is great. You're in here and let's say something actually happened and you change stuff or it looks deleted. Logos lets you go in here to this restore. So I opened up the information panel and then this version history icon. And then you're going to get all these different, just like you would a version history in Google Docs, or I think Word has that too, but you're able to restore to what you had before, which is helpful. This was really helpful for me one time because my iPad did not sync correctly with one of the sermons, and it actually created a blank document on a sermon that I was about to preach. And I was able to go in and restore the old version and be ready to go. And I only had like 30 minutes before I preached. So this is a great great feature. And so glad that you find that helpful. The last thing I want to show you, we're not going to go through them. I just want to speak to those of you who are saying, hey, I'm supposed to preach, I might be teaching, and I don't really have a thing that you're doing, Rylan, because a lot of what I'm doing there's presuppositions that I make when I'm teaching, things that I'm looking for, things that I'm finding in commentaries and in the text and word study, and you don't really have a workflow. What do you do? Well, Logos has several workflows that are specifically designed for people who don't have their workflow established. And I want to point out two of them for you for expository preaching. So working from the text, saying what God has said after he's already said it. I don't think it's the only way to preach, but it is what I do. And the two, there's a lot of options, so you can play around and find the ones that you want. But one is Haddon Robinson's 10 Stages for Expository Preaching. And I'm just going to type in my text here. And then, yeah, it looks like a lot of information, but it walks you through step by step with a thought process of how to prepare a sermon, but also using the tools within Logos to do it. And so if you don't know how to use Logos well, or if you don't know, if you don't have a process, check out one of these workflows. And there's several preaching ones in there that I think will find you'll find helpful. So I'm going to turn my stop share screen so we can see each other and see if there's any other questions. And I know I go a million miles a minute, but I love Logos.
You're good. You should be able to see and hear me once again if Sessions is doing the right thing. Is that accurate?
I can hear you.
Wrong. Okay, wonderful. So let's try. That's okay. I'll try to make my way back to the screen. But thanks, Rylan. That was awesome. Lots of really good questions, and you fielded them like throughout. If there are any additional questions, don't be afraid to ask questions right now in the, there you go. I don't know why it's okay. I'm here too. I'm up here too now. But yeah, if there's any other questions, drop them in the chat and we can wrap this up with those questions. But really appreciated that. I learned some new items myself. And I also threw a question out in closing for folks to be thinking about something that jumped out at them. Sometimes we go through a webinar like this and we get hit with all kinds of things like a fire hose. And then we're like, what did we just learn? So it's kind of an exercise to just like land it a little bit and like make it applicable to your own process as a preacher or a teacher. So the question was just one takeaway from today that you could explore or try on your own after this. So Rylan mentioned it. I mentioned it at the start, but we do have a workshop coming up where you can take some of these lessons and then the things that we didn't have time to dig into and apply them to your own personal like context. So if you're interested in that, I dropped the link in chat a couple times, but it's just logosdaily.com/webinars. And so you can check that out. I just dropped the link once more. So I hope to see you in the upcoming workshop. But again, everyone say thanks to Rylan for his time today. And I know he's got someone very important waiting for him after this call so that he's got to attend to. So thanks, Rylan. I really appreciate you and your heart for the word, man. All right.
Appreciate y'all. Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right. Of course. See you later. Bye.